It's an unspoken rule, isn't it? That some spaces in our homes are just left alone, like a museum of forgotten memories, gathering dust in the silence. The attic, a place where we store not just things, but the remnants of our past, the echoes of lives lived. For years, the attic of the old house had been a tomb, a silent testament to a life I thought I knew, a life my parents had carefully, meticulously built and presented to the world. But deep within that dusty crypt, hidden behind forgotten trunks and under a cascade of moth-eaten blankets, lay a secret, a single weathered letter. It wasn't the kind of letter you'd find in a box of keepsakes. It was a plea, a desperate whisper from the past, waiting for someone to listen. And that someone was me. I'm Eleanor, just a girl who lost her parents too soon. They weren't famous, weren't eccentric millionaires with a hidden fortune. They were just mom and dad, a loving couple who spent their lives building a home, a quiet life, or so I thought. When they passed, a stillness fell over me, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm. I spent weeks just walking through the house, a ghost in my own home, trying to feel their presence, to find some last connection. The house was a portrait of their love, their shared history, or so I believed. It was my father's idea to clear out the attic. Start fresh, sweetie, he'd always said. But I couldn't, not until now. So, on a Tuesday afternoon, under the harsh glare of a single bare bulb, I began the grim task. Each box was a time capsule. Old Christmas ornaments, faded photographs, my mother's wedding dress folded carefully in tissue paper. I found a small, locked wooden box, the kind you see in old movies, meant to hold a diary or a handful of jewels. My parents were never ones for theatrics. So what was this? I found the key on a chain around my mother's jewelry box, a small, silver heart. The lock clicked open with a soft sigh, revealing nothing, just a single, solitary letter tucked inside. The paper was yellowed and fragile, the ink a faint, spidery scrawl. The handwriting was neat, but the words were a jumble of panic and fear. I read it once and then again. The words seemed to swim on the page. Please, I need help. They've taken her. It was unsigned. I flipped the letter over, expecting to see a name, a date, anything. But there was nothing. It was like a message in a bottle, tossed into the sea of time, with no return address. Who was this her? And who was they? My heart pounded in my chest. My parents were the most straightforward people I'd ever known. This felt like something out of a pulp novel. It was an anomaly, a jarring note in a perfectly harmonious melody. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was not just a random letter, a stray piece of paper. This was a story my parents had kept hidden from me my entire life. A cold dread began to creep up my spine. Had my parents been involved in something dark? Something they were forced to keep silent about? My mind raced, conjuring up scenarios from spy thrillers to family feuds. It was absurd, but I couldn't deny the evidence in my hands. The letter was real. The fear in the handwriting was palpable. The lack of a signature, it felt deliberate. A secret kept for a reason. And a part of me, a small, selfish part, was terrified that the people I thought I knew were strangers. What if this was the tip of an iceberg? What if my whole life had been built on a foundation of lies? The first thing I did was try to find more. I tore through the attic, my carefully organized boxes now a chaotic mess. I was desperate for another clue, another thread to pull. I found nothing. The attic held its secrets tight. So I went downstairs to my parents' bedroom, to their study, to every corner of the house. I rummaged through old photo albums. My mother with her kind smile. My father with his quiet strength. Their wedding photos, their vacation photos. A perfect life, meticulously documented. But there was a gap. A hole in the timeline a few years after they were married, where the photo albums were strangely thin. Was this a coincidence? Or was it intentional? Then I found it, tucked inside an old copy of a gardening book my mother cherished. A single photograph. It was an old black and white picture of my mother and a young woman who looked so much like her it was uncanny. The woman was holding a small baby. My mother was standing beside her, an arm around her shoulder, a look of profound sadness on her face. The woman in the photo. She was beautiful, with my mother's almond-shaped eyes and my father's strong jawline. But who was she? I had never seen her before. And the baby? Was that me? No. I was a baby in a different photo. This baby was older. And who was its mother? The woman who looked like my mother. This photograph, coupled with the letter, started to paint a disturbing picture. A picture of two sisters, one of whom I never knew existed. And the baby, was that my niece? Or my sister? My heart stopped. Could I have an older sister I never knew about? A sister my parents had hidden from me? The realization hit me like a physical blow. The letter, the photograph, the strange lack of photos from those years. It all pointed to one conclusion. There was another child. A daughter my parents had kept a secret they had taken to their graves. I felt a surge of betrayal, but it was quickly followed by a powerful, consuming curiosity. Why? Why would they do this? What happened? A sister. My sister. I repeated the word in my mind. A foreign, yet familiar, sound. I had to find her. I had to know the truth. The attic, once a tomb of memories, was now a launching pad. And I was about to embark on a journey that would redefine everything I thought I knew about my family. My hands trembled as I stared at the faded black and white photograph. It was a silent witness, a single piece of evidence that shattered my entire reality. I had always been an only child. That was my truth, the foundation of my life. My parents had never spoken of a sister, a hidden child, a family secret so profound it was buried in a forgotten attic. The photograph was a portal to a world I never knew existed. The young woman in the picture, so eerily like my mother, had a sadness in her eyes, a weariness that went beyond the camera's lens. And the baby, I zoomed in on the photo on my phone, the digital pixels revealing the soft, round face of an infant. Could this really be my sister? My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Betrayal, confusion, and a gnawing sense of loss for a relationship I never had. I knew I couldn't solve this alone. I needed answers, and the only people who might have them were the ones who knew my parents before I was born. My parents had lived in the same neighborhood for decades. The street was a collection of well-maintained homes, and the neighbors were like an extended family. I thought of Mrs. Gable, a sweet, elderly woman who lived 2 doors down. She had been my mother's best friend for over 50 years. If anyone knew, it would be her. I walked over to her house, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The air was thick with humidity, the late afternoon sun casting long, heavy shadows. Mrs. Gable welcomed me with her usual warm smile, her eyes sparkling behind her glasses. We spoke for a while about the weather, about my parents, about the difficult process of clearing out the house. I tried to sound casual, to not give away the turmoil bubbling inside me. But as I took a deep breath, the words came out in a rush. Mrs. Gable, can I ask you something? About my mother's past? Her smile faltered, just for a moment, a subtle shift that I almost missed. Of course, dear. What is it? Did my mother have a sister? An older sister? The question hung in the air, heavy and full of unspoken meaning. Mrs. Gable's face became a mask of deep sadness. She didn't deny it. Instead, she took a long, slow breath and gestured for me to sit down. Eleanor, your mother, bless her heart. She was so strong. She had to be. It's a long story, dear, a very painful one. She began to tell me about my mother's older sister, Amelia. Amelia was the wild one, the artist, the free spirit who was a year ahead of my mother in high school. While my mother was studious and practical, Amelia was a whirlwind of energy and passion. She fell in love with a boy from the wrong side of the tracks, a charming but reckless young man named Michael. My grandparents, strict and traditional, disapproved. They forbade the relationship, but Amelia, defiant, went her own way. She ran away with Michael, and for a few months they were a beautiful, chaotic storm. But then the storm broke. Michael left, and Amelia was left alone, pregnant. Your mother was there for her? Mrs. Gable said. her voice soft with remembrance. She was the only one. Your grandparents, they were so ashamed. They cut Amelia out of their lives completely. It was heartbreaking to watch. The baby in the photograph, that was Amelia's child. The letter, the frantic plea for help, it was from Amelia to my mother. Mrs. Gable explained that my mother had tried to help her sister, to convince their parents to let Amelia come home. But they refused. The family was torn apart. The beautiful, chaotic storm had left nothing but wreckage. Your parents, your mother and father, they had just gotten married then, Mrs. Gable continued, a tear welling in her eye. They were so in love, and they saw what happened to Amelia. They knew how fragile life could be. They tried to help her, but they couldn't go against your grandparents. It was a very dark time. I sat in stunned silence. The pieces were finally beginning to fit together, but the picture they were forming was more tragic than I could have ever imagined. My family wasn't just hiding a secret. They were living with a deep, unhealed wound. The silence wasn't about shame. It was about pain. The kind of pain that can only be buried, never truly forgotten. But what happened to Amelia? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. And the baby? My sister. Mrs. Gable shook her head slowly. I don't know, dear. Amelia was sent away. I don't know where. I only know your mother tried to find her for years. She would write letters, make phone calls, but she never heard back. After a while, she just stopped. It was too painful. The story Mrs. Gable told me was a gut punch. It wasn't a thrilling spy story, but something far more devastating. A story of family, betrayal, and a love that was sacrificed for the sake of appearances. My parents, the people I had placed on a pedestal, were not perfect. They were broken. They were people who had carried a great weight of guilt and grief, a weight that had shaped their lives and, in turn, mine. The letter, that single plea for help, was a ghost of that pain. It was the last cry of a lost soul, a sister trying to find her way home. I thanked Mrs. Gable and walked back to my house, the weight of her words settling over me like a heavy blanket. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a monument to a beautiful tragedy, a hidden wound. I held the photograph in my hands, a silent question on my lips. Who was the baby? My sister. Where was she now? Was she still alive? And what about Amelia, the free spirit, the artist? What happened to her after she was cast out? I had a new name, Amelia, a new mission. My journey was no longer about a dusty letter in an attic. It was about a person, a life, a sister I never knew, and I was determined to find her no matter the cost. The weight of Mrs. Gable's story settled deep in my bones. It was a truth I could feel, a pain that echoed through the decades. My quest was no longer a curious investigation. It was a desperate search for closure, for a chance to heal a wound I never knew my family had. My parents' silence wasn't a betrayal. It was a shield, meant to protect me from a pain they had carried for a lifetime. But their shield had become a barrier, and now I had to find a way to break through it. The name Amelia was a ghost on my lips, a whisper from the past that demanded to be heard. I knew she had a child, my sister, but where did they go? The trail had gone cold 50 years ago, and I had nothing but a few names and a fading photograph. I started where Mrs. Gable's story left off. My grandparents' old house. They had passed away years ago, and the house had been sold. But I remembered an old neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a gruff but kind man who had lived on that street for as long as I could remember. I knew he had been a close friend of my grandfather's. I took a chance and drove to the old neighborhood. The street was the same, but the faces were different. I knocked on Mr. Henderson's door, my heart pounding in my chest. He opened the door, a look of surprise on his face. Eleanor? My goodness, look at you. You're all grown up. You look just like your mother. After a few minutes of polite conversation, I asked him about Amelia. The name hung in the air, a silent accusation. Mr. Henderson's face hardened. He looked away, his eyes clouding with a distant memory. Amelia, your mother's sister. A sad story that, your grandparents, they weren't bad people, Eleanor, just proud. Too proud for their own good. They were so worried about what the neighbors would say. He told me how my grandfather had been a well-respected figure in the community and how Amelia's unplanned pregnancy had threatened to ruin his reputation. He couldn't stand the shame, Mr. Henderson said, his voice a low rumble. He gave her an ultimatum: give the baby up for adoption or be cast out of the family forever. He thought it would be a simple choice. He didn't understand how much she loved that child. That baby was her whole world. And then he told me something that chilled me to the bone. Your mother. She tried to help. She pleaded with her father, but he was stubborn. He gave Amelia a little money and a one-way ticket to a different state. He never told your mother where he sent her. He said it was for the best, that the secret had to be buried. But your mother knew it was a lie. She tried to find her, of course. She would sneak away and look for clues, but your grandfather found out. He threatened to disown your mother, too, if she didn't stop. He was a frightening man when he was angry. The picture was becoming clearer. My parents had been caught in the middle of a family feud. They were victims, too. My mother, in particular, had carried the burden of her sister's fate. The letter I found in the attic, it wasn't a desperate plea for my mother's help. It was a cry for help from Amelia, a cry that my mother had been unable to answer. But Mr. Henderson also gave me a name. I remember the doctor who delivered the baby, he said, his eyes unfocused as he recalled the memory. A young man just out of medical school, Dr. Callahan. He was the one who helped with the birth. Your grandfather made him promise he'd never talk about it. But I remember hearing that he was very fond of Amelia. He thought what your grandfather did was cruel. Dr. Callahan. A name. A living person who might still remember the details of that day 50 years ago. I felt a surge of hope, a jolt of electricity that ran through my veins. The trail wasn't cold after all. I had a starting point, a person to find. A doctor. He was the only one who might know where Amelia and her baby had gone. I thanked Mr. Henderson profusely and drove away, my mind racing. I had a name and a mission. I was so close. The truth was just a few steps away, and I was going to find it no matter what. My parents had failed to find their way back to Amelia, but I wouldn't. I was going to finish what they started and finally bring my sister home. With a name, Dr. Callahan, a 50-year-old thread was no longer a fragile, lost cause. It was a lifeline. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a fire in my belly that had been missing since my parents' passing. This wasn't just about a hidden sister. It was about honoring my mother's silent grief, about finding the person she had spent a lifetime mourning. I spent the next few days researching, using every resource I could find. Old phone books, medical registries, online genealogy sites. It was a long shot, but I had a name, and in the digital age, a name could be a key to a forgotten past. After countless hours of searching, I found a lead. A Dr. Robert Callahan, a retired physician in a small town in Oregon, a few states away. The details matched what Mr. Henderson had told me. He had been a young doctor in my grandparents' town before moving. I was certain it was him. My heart was a mess of emotions. Hope, anxiety, and a deep-seated fear of what I might find. What if he was gone? What if he didn't remember? What if the truth was more painful than I could handle? I booked a flight for the next morning. I had to know. I found Dr. Callahan in a small, quiet town, living in a cozy house surrounded by a beautiful garden. He was an elderly man with kind eyes and a slow, deliberate way of speaking. When I told him my name and who my parents were, a flicker of recognition passed over his face. When I mentioned Amelia, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. He invited me inside, and over a cup of tea, he began to tell me the end of the story. I remember Amelia vividly, he said, his voice raspy with age. She was a force of nature, so much life, so much passion. And she loved that baby more than anything. He described how my grandfather had been an unyielding force, and how he had witnessed my mother's desperate attempts to help her sister. Your mother was a good woman, Eleanor. She did everything she could. But your grandfather, he was a cruel man, hiding behind a veil of respectability. He had Amelia committed. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Committed. Not just sent away, but institutionalized. My grandfather had told everyone she had gone to live with relatives, but in reality, he had her placed in a mental asylum, far from home, with no way to contact anyone. Her crime? Refusing to give up her child. He called it hysteria, Dr. Callahan said, his voice laced with disgust. Said she was mentally unstable because she wouldn't follow his orders. But it was just an excuse to get rid of her. And he put the baby up for adoption himself. He told her she would never see her child again. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a family secret. It was a crime. My grandfather had torn a mother and child apart. My mother had been so close, yet so powerless. But then, Dr. Callahan's face softened. But that's not the end of the story, Eleanor. I couldn't just stand by. I was a young man, full of anger and a sense of justice. I made a promise to Amelia. I told her I would find her baby, and I would make sure she was safe. Dr. Callahan told me he had used his connections to track down the baby. My sister. She had been adopted by a kind, loving couple. I made sure they were good people, he said, his voice firm. I visited them without telling them who I was, just to be sure. I knew that child would have a beautiful life. Her name, they named her Alice. Tears streamed down my face. Alice, my sister. She was out there. She had a name. But what about Amelia? And Amelia? I asked, my voice trembling. Dr. Callahan's eyes grew misty. I found her years later, after your grandparents passed away. I brought her a letter from your mother. A letter full of love and apologies. Amelia, she was never the same. She lived in a home for a while, then she found a small apartment. She never married. She became a painter. She used to paint flowers. Beautiful, vibrant flowers. But she always painted them with a single tear on a single petal. And then he gave me one last thing. A small piece of paper folded carefully. It was an address. She passed away a few years ago, he said. She never forgot you. She loved you very much, and she loved her sister. She never stopped hoping. The address was for a little art gallery in the same town where I lived. The gallery was owned by a woman named Alice. I rushed back home, my heart pounding with a mixture of grief and elation. I went to the gallery, and there, hanging on the wall, was a painting. A beautiful, vibrant bouquet of flowers. And on one single petal, a single painted tear. I knew it. The woman behind the counter, a woman with my mother's eyes and a gentle smile, walked up to me. Can I help you? She asked. I'm Eleanor, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I think you're my sister. She looked at me, a flicker of surprise, then her eyes welled up. You have your mother's eyes, she whispered. We embraced, two strangers, yet two souls who had been connected by a single, hidden letter, a single painted tear, and a lifetime of unspoken love. The truth had been buried for decades, but sometimes all it takes is a single, forgotten letter to unearth a story of betrayal, of love, of loss, and of a family that was waiting to be found. Thank you for joining me on this incredible and emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that every family has a story waiting to be told. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. We're just getting started.